Good evening. Hope everyone is doing well. 8:40. Actually, we're a minute late. I think this is the latest we've ever started shiur. I'm sorry. I apologize. Let's get started. We're learning Maseches Pesachim Daf Ayin Gimel, and as well Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, most of the page. Yirtzeh Hashem. I'll just say a reminder, beginning and end, that there is no daf tomorrow. I'll post it in the WhatsApp group. There's no daf being posted. It all will be learned, but we're just skipping tomorrow night due to my work schedule. So let us continue. We're on the top of Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, and here we're starting with a quote from the Mishnah that we recently learned, and it says 3 lines down, Shachto shelo la'ochlav, that if the Kohen or the person doing the Shechita does so, he brings the Korban Pesach, but it's shelo la'ochlav, so then of course you violated Shabbos. Remember the setting in which we're functioning here is Yudal Chachalios b'Shabbos. So when it's a case of Yudal Chachalios b'Shabbos, and a person does a Korban Pesach on that Shabbos in the afternoon, all at the right time, but they did it shelo la'ochlav, they did it stam, just for kicks. So the halacha is that they're going to be chayav. Says the Gemara, well, pshita, that's no different than doing anything else that's asur on Shabbos that you have no purpose doing. It says that's absolutely a problem. Kevan dehasam pasal. Of course, had that korban been brought as it relates to Korban Pesach, we would have said that the korban is pasal. Then hacha, when we intersect with Hilchos Shabbos, then of course you're going to be chayiv. So it says the Gemara, well, don't worry. Mishum de tana seifa pater tana reisha chayiv. No, it was only to keep the Mishnah poetic, because in the Seifa, it says Pater, so then in the Reisha, it's going to say Chayav. What was the Seifa? The Seifa was the case where it says La'ochlav and Shelo La'ochlav, where the Shochet has in mind two groups of people, some who are eligible to eat and some who are not eligible to eat. So under those circumstances, we said Pater, and because the Reisha said Pater, the Seifa said Chayav. Again, the poetry, making sure that the Mishnah is easy to read. Says the Gemara, 5th line, Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, V'hanami. Pshita. Even that case was obvious. You're telling me the word chayiv was there because the case of pater was there in the seifa, but the case of pater was so obvious. We've already learned this many times. Says the Gemara, v'anami pshita. It's obvious that in the case of the seifa where you have la'ochlav and shelo la'ochlav, lamulin v'la'arelim, l'torim l'tzmein, in every case where there's a mix of people, some of whom are eligible to eat and some of whom are not, of course that's going to be the case. Mishum dehasam kasher, because by a regular Korban Pesach during the weekday, we would have said that was kasher, hacha pater, pashit, that over here would be pater. So why are either of those cases in the Mishnah? You want to tell me that chayiv is there because I needed pater? No, we didn't need pater either. Both of those cases are extraneous. Says the Gemara, since we wanted to teach the case of shachto shelo lishmo, that was the opening of our Mishnah. A person does a Korban Pesach and they do it on Shabbos and it's shelo lishma. Tananami shelo la'ochla. We also taught the case, again, for poetic purposes, for Mishnaic purposes, to ensure that we would know what the halacha would be in regards to shelo la'ochla, for people who are not even eligible to eat. V'hi gufa lamali. Why did I need this case to start with? Says the Gemara. Why did I need the case of the Korban Pesach intersecting with Shabbos? Mishum de kabayli flugi Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua. Because we wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to learn the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, who have a machlokes in what we refer to as ta'a b'dvar mitzvah. Just to review this one brief idea, and then we'll continue in the Gemara. Ta'a b'dvar mitzvah means that I'm making a mistake. I'm doing a shechita on an animal that I should not be shechting. My intentions are excellent. They're for the sake of a mitzvah, but I happen to have made an error in some part of what I'm doing. Do we say that the fact that what you're doing is associated, at least in principle, with a mitzvah, therefore it reduces your consequence and you're no longer chayiv v'chiyuv chatas? That is the shita Rabbi Yoshua. Or do we hold like Rabbi Eliezer, the ta'a mitzvah is still going to be chayiv? That's their machlokas. Good. Says the Gemara 10 lines down or so. Amarle Rav Huna b'rei de Rav Chinana lebrei. Rav Huna Bar Chinana said to his son was going off to yeshiva, Ki azlas l'kamid de Reb Zrika. When you get in front of your Rebbe Reb Zrika, ba'i minei, I'd like you to please ask him the following question. This is an idea from Hilchos Shabbos. This is a great question, an easy Gemara. It's really quite fascinating, actually. L'divrei ha'omer mekalkel b'chabura pater. We are familiar with an idea of mekalkel b'chabura pater, that if you just pasha destroy something all out, even though the activities in it would otherwise in theory be malacha, but because what you did had no toelas at all, that's called mekalkel. And if you hold mekalkel b'chabura as pater, so then that leads to a slew of questions. So this is what I want, says the father to the son. I want you to ask Reb Zrika. According to the one who holds l'divrei omer mekalkel b'chabura pater, so then I don't understand. Shachto shelo la'ochlav chayiv. Why would we say that if you shecht an animal, when there's no eligible people to eat the animal, why should you be chayiv? Mati came. What good have you done? In other words, if you shecht an animal with no one to eat it, that should be mekalka b'chabura, because you've done nothing. There's zero benefit to what you did. You helped no one. You killed an animal. The animal it can't be eaten. It's puzzle. The eaters can't eat it because there were no eaters. So then why isn't this just mekalkel b'chabura? So again, if you hold the mekalkel b'chabura is pater, so then I don't understand. If there was no one who could have eaten the korban to start with, and you shechted it, why should you be chayiv? Mekalkel b'chabura is pater. So we're intersecting the laws of Shabbos and trying to apply them over here. Mekalkel b'chabura have just been destructive. Here too, when there's no one to eat, you said you're chayiv. Why are you chayiv? Answers the Gemara. Says the Gemara, really, tikain, how did you fix it? Im alu lo yerdu. That if in fact you erroneously brought this korban up to the mizbeach, the halacha is that you don't have to take it down. So you've been able to elevate this animal with a little bit of kedusha by incorrectly shechting the animal. So that's considered a tikkun, and therefore you can't apply mekalkel b'chabura pater.
That's why you use pater.
That's why you're chayiv. You're chayiv because you elevated that animal with your shchita. I'm mekalkel b'chabura. It's not mekalkel b'chabura when there's any toelis in what you did. What was your toelis? The animal gets to stay up on the korban. So it's small, it's a tiny little change, but that's why we don't apply mekalkel b'chabur here. And the Gemara pushes further, a third of the way down, Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Shachtov v'nimtza bal mum chayiv. We said that if you shecht an animal and you find that it's a bal mum, you should be chayiv. But why? The animal's useless. Again, why don't we apply the principle of mekalkel b'chabura pater to an animal that's a bal mum? The animal wasn't eligible before the shechita. So now you shechted it, and we're saying you're chayiv. Why are you chayiv? It's mekalkel b'chabura. You haven't done anything to that. You've changed nothing. You've changed nothing. It wasn't eligible before. It's not eligible now, and you just killed it in the process. So says the Gemara, Ma tikain. Why is it that we don't apply mekalkel b'chabura? What change did you make? Answers the Gemara, tikain b'dukin shebe'ayin. That if there is something in its eye, some translate this as like a cataract or something that is a blemish in the eye that's visible. According to Rabbi Akiva, if the mum that an animal has is that it has cataracts, so then yes, you're not supposed to do the korban. But if you do it, if you bring it up to the mizbeach, then you don't have to bring it down, and that's considered a tikkun. You've elevated that animal just a little bit, and therefore, even though you're right, you can't eat it, but we don't define mekalkel b'chabura pater based on achila. Any benefit, then you can if there's any benefit, you can no longer apply mekalkel b'chabura. Next.
Meaning you do the korban and the chabura changed, or you knew from the start that the chabura was no good.
Mekalkel b'chabura is a principle in Hilchos Shabbos. If I do something that is purely out of destructive purposes, there's no benefit at all, zero. So the halacha is you're not chayiv for that. You're pater. And we're trying to take that principle and we're trying to apply it here and saying, if you do a shechita of an animal with mekalkel b'chabura, mekalkel is you're making a chabura as a wound. You're being destructive by making a wound, by cutting, let's say, with a knife, by shechita knife. So then the halacha is that you have it's not mutter, it's an isur derabanan, but there's no biblical consequence. There's no korban chatas, for example. Any positive plus, correct. So in all of the cases that we've discussed so far, in all of the shchitas, they weren't edible, the animal had a mum, whatever the case was, but in every case they had a little benefit. And because they had a little benefit, we couldn't apply the principle of mekalkel b'chabura. We couldn't apply the principle of this is simply destructive. Mekalkel b'chabura is always pater. But what we're saying is that we can't apply mekalkel b'chabura here because it wasn't pure destruction, because you elevated the animal to be eligible for the mizbeach in each of these two cases. Good. Next case. What about the case of shachtu v'nimtza treifa b'seiser pater? That we know that we said that when the animal is shechted and after the fact you find that an animal is a treifa. Let's say there's a hole in one of the lungs. There's a sircha in the lungs. When I was in Smicha, they took us to a slaughterhouse. They took the lungs out after shechita. They put it on an air pump and they turned on the air. You'd see the lungs billow out very large. We didn't see any sirchas, but had there been, you would have heard like a little. Well, yeah, it would have. Kilud, and they would put water over it. The same thing they do on a tire to see if there's any bubbling. So it was fascinating. So, anyways, let's say that you did that and you find that the animal has a sircha, and that's taka treifa. Fine. So that we know is pater because it's beseser. What's the diuk? Habigalu chayiv. But if it had a treifa mark on the outside and you missed it, you should be chayiv in that case. That's the inference. Says the Gemara, why are you chayiv? We should say mekalkel b'chaburas pater. The animal's a treifa. So you just destroyed an animal. Same question that we've asked now for the third time. Says the Gemara, matikein, what benefit have you given? Answers the Gemara, you actually did something very big here. This is probably the biggest difference yet. Tikein lehotzi midei nevela. The animal's not a nevela, and nevelas have tuma. That's a huge nafkamina. Because if a nevela is not a nevela because it's a treifa, if it's a treifa, there's no tuma. If it's a nevela, there's tuma. But lamai nafkamina, a billion nafkaminas, touching it, eating it by accident, you're a kohen, all the other implications. If it's a sheret, we don't shech shratzim, but any animal that it would be that has tuma status, it's only if it's a nevela. But here, the psul is that it's a treifa, not a nevela. So that's a very, very big difference. Maskif la Ravina asks a question on all of this. Hold on one second. Hadatanya, we have a brisa, and the brisa writes in the following case where someone is definitely not on their game. Hashochet chatas b'Shabbos. A person does a korban chatas on Shabbos, which we don't do because it needs to be brought during a weekday. It's not a chiyuv of that day. So you bring a chatas on Shabbos. That's Isser D'Oraisa number one. Bachutz. You do it outside the azara. That's violation number. That's shchutei chutz, as we call it in the learning world. And then you did it la'avod azara. You're really having a bad day. You brought a korban chatas for the sake of avodah zarah on Shabbos. So you've done a lot of bad things right now. What's the halacha? The brisa writes, chayiv aleha gimel chatos. So then asks the Gemara, same question we've asked before. How does this brisa not match mekalkel b'chabura? Ma'atikein. In all of these cases, what are you going to do? You're going to put it on the mizbeach. It's shchutei chutz and it's a avodah zarah.
But once you said that shchita trade was better than avail, so.
But this isn't about treifa. This animal wouldn't have been a treifa. This animal is just going to be a nevela.
No, the opposite.
Nope, not here. Here it's not a treifa question. This is the brisa. Hashochet chatas b'Shabbos. It's a chatas. It's a regular chatas. Right. You did an avera sheyesh, whatever. You did an avera. You ate treif by accident. So you bring a korban on, but you're not so smart. You bring it on Shabbos. Right. You shecht it in the wrong place, and you do it for the sake of it for another deity. What? What'd you say? Right. So you're holding in a different religion. Which would be the fourth crime. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so then says the Gemara, Mati Kain, what would be the upside? What have you done? So Amar Rav Avira, he says, Shemotzia mide Ever Minachai. Fascinating. We know that there's an Isser D'Oraisa Ever Minachai. Now we couldn't eat this animal no matter what, but there's a nafkamina for a guy, because the Gemara in Avodah Zarah on Daf Vav indicates that how do we define leaf neighbor losite michshol? Two examples are given: lahoshit yayin lenazir and lahoshit ever minachai lenachri. So that's an example. That's an nafkamina. Can I sell this animal to a guy? That's a huge difference. Let's say it's a big cow. So then I want to make some money off the deal. Okay, I'm not a Talmud Chacham. I brought a chatas on Shabbos, but it's not Asur Behana. And as long as there's no Isser of Eber Minachai, so then if someone at that point, while the animal's still dying, would tear off a leg, a guy would be allowed to eat it. That would be enough. In regards to the applicability of Mekalkel B'Chabura Pater, yes. To compare Mekalkel B'Chabura to here, we've just seen how sensitive that din is. Mekalkel B'Chabura on Shabbos is very difficult. Some poskim actually raise the question, if the Mekalkel on Shabbos helps you with your ka'as, you're such a Baal ka'as, you kill an animal on Shabbos, you're chayav. Some poskim say that. They're saying, it's difficult. You are literally stabbing an animal for no reason, not because you're angry.
Doesn't matter, but you're still taking it out of Eber Minachai status.
Oh, not if you don't shecht it. If you just kill it, that's not true. If you just stab an animal and don't shecht it properly, then it's still.
Still Eber Minachai?
Oh yeah, Eber Minachai is patered by shchita.
Meaning, if the animal's still alive. For what?
Pashat if the animal's
if the animal's dead and someone rips off his leg and eats it, it's not even.
So the poskim speak about if the animal has like a leg removed, like during the dying process. So that's enough. So then it paters the Eber Minachai. But if it's not shechted, then you go Eber Minachai. But it's difficult. You're right. It's difficult to check the box here. It doesn't apply here anyways, because all of these cases are not applicable to the comparison of Mekalkel B'Chabura Pater. Okay, let's continue. Says the Gemara, we are 2/3 of the way down. Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Amar Huna, Amar Rav. This shita of Rav is going to carry the day for us. A lot to discuss about this, and he says as follows: Asham shenitek l're'eha v'shachto stam. Says that it said, what's the case of Asham shenitek l're'eha? You have an animal that's sent out to graze. Why would this animal be sent out to graze? because one of two things: either the owner died, and the base Hamikdash found out about it, and now the animal can't be used for the korban. It shouldn't be used, I should say. Someone inadvertently will in a moment, but at the moment, either that person died, or that the owner got kapara from a different korban, and this asham is now extra. Fine. So in that case, what happens if it's shechto stam? You shouldn't have shechted it because the animal should be left to graze, but you shechted it. And what if you did it without kavana? So the halacha is that it's kosher le'ola. You have an asham, which is a different type of korban than an ola. So even without intent, if you shechted it, counts as an ola. So says the Gemara, Alma, what do we see from this line of Rav? It seems to be that he holds kasavar lo boy akira. It seems to be that he holds that you do not need to expressly state a change in intent from, let's say, asham to ola, as we have in this case. Okay, asks the Gemara, hold on. Ihachi, if it's true what you're saying, Rav, that lo boy akira, that we don't require you to expressly state your intention to change a focus of a korban from an asham to an ola, then who cares about when it is? Kilo nitkenami. Ihachi kilo nitaknami. Even if the animal wasn't sent out to graze. Once you hold lo boy akira, then you should be able, that animal, no matter what, can just shift automatically whatever is preferred. So then to that says the Gemara, no, because we have an Isser D'Rabbanan, Gzeira la'achar kapara, atu lifnei kapara. We're concerned about that because what we don't want to do is for someone to have a need to bring an asham to get them kapara, but then they won't bring it because they also have another burden to bring an ola. So they change gears without having any akira. So we're concerned about that. We're afraid that someone may inadvertently or maybe intentionally take their asham and make it an ola before the asham is brought, and they wouldn't have had kapara, and that's a problem. Umina timra. From where do we learn to say such a thing? From where do we learn that there's a gzeira of la'achar kapara atu lifnei kapara? Says the Gemara, that is a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that is found in Maseches Tmura, and here is how it reads. Asham, if you have a korban asham, shemeso ba'alav, its owners died, o sheniskapru be'aleha, or if they got kapar in another way. So the halacha is, sheniskapru ba'alav, its owners got kapar. So yira ad sheistai, let it graze until it gets a mum. And then v'yimkor v'yiplu damav l'nadava, you should let it graze. And then once it gets a mum, you should sell it and take its money and put it into the korban nadava pile. That's one approach in the Tanaim. The next approach in the Tanaim is a little different. 5 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Eliezer, Omer Yamus. No, this animal needs to die. No grazing, nothing. Let the animal die. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Yima. This is the line that's important for us because we're trying to find the Mishnah, a source to teach us about our gzeira of la'achar kapara. In light of lifnei kapara. So it says the Gemara, Rabbi Yeshua Omer, yimacher v'yavi b'damav ola. You can sell it, and what should you do with its finances, with the gains? What you should do is you should give it to an ola. So the Gemara makes a diuk, 3 lines from the bottom. B'damav in, when it comes to a korban ola, yes, you can take the money from that asham and make it into an ola. Aval gufo lo, but the animal itself cannot be made into an ola. Gazar la'achar kapara atu lifnei kapara shmamina. We see from here, why not the body of the animal? Why can't you actually bring the animal? Because we're concerned that if we say that one is allowed to simply just have this automatic name change from asham to ola without being by akira, without intentionally trying to change the status of the korban, so then you might do the same thing before you've achieved kapara, and then to shift from an asham to an ola means you won't get kapara. Shema mina, that's the source for us. So then asks the Gemara the following question. We have the shita of Rav. Rav seems to say lo by akira. That's what it seems. Rav seems to say that we do not need to expressly state the desire to change a korban from asham to ola. So says the Gemara as follows. Eisvei Rav Chizda le Rav Huna. Rav Chizda says to Rav Huna as follows. We said in our Mishnah that if an animal was shechted and then you learned that the owners backed off and they said, I don't want any part of this korban, top of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, says the Gemara, V'tani Allah, we have a brisa about that Mishnah. Is that a Mishnah? We have a brisa connected to that brisa, which says, B'chol ki hai gavna, had this been during the week, what would we have done with that korban Pesach? Yisaref miyad. We would have burned that immediately. This line, Yisaref miyad in the brisa, we're going to have a hard time with, because let's see how this doesn't fit with Rav. Rav said that it seems to be that we do not need akira, that we do not need to expressly state the change of status of a korban from one to the next. That's what Rav says. But this brisa says that in such a case that yisaref miyad. Let's see how this plays out. Iamris bishlama ba'e akira, not like Rav. If you say that ba'e akira, we do need you to say that there's a change in the animal status. So then, hi Pesachu, this is a korban Pesach. The chayvan deles labalim, because there's no owners anymore because they backed out. That was the case. The owners backed away from the korban. Havale psula begufo. Then the animal is inherently flawed. There's no one to change the status. If you say boy akira, that you need to actually verbally say the asham is now an ola or whatever the transition process is, but that doesn't exist here because there are no bailim. Therefore, tulahacha yisaref miyad. Now I understand why the Brisa says it needs to be burned immediately. That makes perfect sense. But if you hold like Rab, who says lo boy akira, then why would it be Saref Miyad? Meresha Havale Shlamim. It used to be a Shlamim, so Psula Mishum Mai. What was the actual Psul? Because if it's Lo Bay Akira, like Rav is saying, if it's Lo Bay Akira, well, then we can just change the status to another thing automatically, and then it won't be Puzzle anymore. Mishum Davar Acher. It must be that it was Puzzle from another thing. We're 6 lines down, Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. What was wrong with the animal in this case? It was shechted late. It was shechted after the Tamid Shel Ben Harabayim. And then in that case, Ibor Tzura Bay, we let the animal, we learned about this principle before. Ibor Tzura Bay means that the animal is already shechted, but it was shechted at a bad time. So we lay it out on the side and wait till it starts to look like a dead animal. Right away, the animal doesn't look like it's dead. But later, it does look like it's dead. And then we don't do the biur. It's not Yisaref Miyad. So this poses a very big difficulty for Rav. Let me just say out the question again. Rav says on the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, Rav says, he implies at least, that we do not need Akira. That when you're changing the status of a korban from Asham to Ola, or from one status to another, you don't need to be express about that. You don't need to say clearly, that was not a sentence. You don't need to say expressly that, that's not a word either. You don't need to express clearly, whatever. Is there a grammar teacher out there? You don't need to say clearly that you're switching from an asham to an ola. That's what Rav says. But this brisa says yisaref miyad, but that only works if you don't agree with Rav. So Rav has a brisa that seems to go against him. And let's bring still more of a proof. To Tanya, how do we know about ibor tzura, about waiting for an animal to change its look? To Tanya, the brisa writes, ze'aklal kol shepsula begufo yisaref miyad. When it comes to a psul beguf, yes, it needs to be burned right away. But bedam ubebailem, that's us. When it comes to blood, or when it comes to the owners backing away, so then we don't do yisaref miyad as tabor tzurasa v'yetzil beis hasreifa. First we wait till it changes and then we burn it. So the brisa seems to imply that Rav's sheet is impossible. So what we're going to be doing over the course of this page is we're going to learn a number of answers to Rav's shita. The first few are going to try to make Rav fit with the brisa of Yisaref Miyad. And the last answer is going to totally shift away the answer of Rav Ashi, which is already in the widest lines of the page. Let's try answer number 1. Says the Gemara, Ella, therefore, because this brisa is present, we therefore need to have a better understanding of Rav. The brisa implies that boy akira, that you do need to expressly state your change from asham to ole, and the brisa saying Rav says that you don't need to make that express comment, and here it seems to be that you do need that. So then answer number 1 is as follows: Ella lo tema shachto stam kasher l'shum ola. Change the language of Rav. Rav really agrees. Rav really agrees, but when the brisa, when his comment on the previous page says that it was stam, it wasn't stam. Ella, what should it say? Ema shachto l'shum ola kasher. You changed you literally changed your intent. Alma, therefore, what do we see? Boy akira. So now, if we change Rav to say boy akira, then he fits with the brisa of yisaref miyad kaftor b'ferach. He fits perfectly. But Rav Chia bar Gamda, this is the third time we've seen this Gemara. We're going to see it again at the bottom of the page. The Amar. There he was talking about a case where the Bailim became Tamei Meis as it relates to Yud Daled Nisan. They couldn't bring the Korban then, so they were pushed off to Pesach Sheni. And there, and only there, Haihu Deboy Akira. Seemingly over there, says Rav Chia bar Gamda, that's where we need Akira. And that implies that Habe Alma Lo Boy Akira Ma'ikal Meimar. So it seems to be that that Rav Chia Bar Gamda agrees with our version of Rav. So we're back to our question. Ella says the Gemara answer number 2. Ella Amar Rav Huna, what does Rav Huna say? Rav Huna says as follows. Amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua, Hacha, what are we talking about? Hacha, where it says Yisaref miyad b'maya skinan, what are we talking about in the Brisa? Kigon shehifrishu kodem chatzos umesu bailem achar chatzos, that the animal was set aside for the korban before chatzos hayom, and the owners died after chatzos. To have of what's called nira v'nidche, that at some point the animal was ready to go, and now the animal is no longer ready to go. It wasn't even karev yet. And once an animal is ready to go, it's nira v'nidche, and then it was pushed off. Shuveinu chozer v'nira. That's what yisaref miyad means. But it's not even discussing boy akira or not boy akira, and therefore Rav can maintain his shita that lo boy akira, that one is not required to directly state the change from asham to olam. He can hold whatever he wants because this price is not talking about that. Says the Gemara, midi hutayim elo l'Rav. The only thing you've been trying to do is explain Rav's shita. That's what all of this Gemara has been so far. But you can't say that because ha'amar Rav ba'alei chaim einam nidachin. That you just tried to show Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua that the brisa of Yisaref Miyad fits with Rav because of the principle of nira v'nidche shuveinu chozer v'nira. But Rav doesn't agree with that. Rav disagrees with that principle. Ella, therefore we come to answer 3. Halfway down Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. Ella Marav Papa Hamani. Who is this brisa talking about? It must be talking about Rabbi Eliezer. When does it say Yisaref Miyad, the brisa at the top line? That's the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. To Amar v'chein hashochet acherim l'shem Pesach. If someone takes an animal and they shechta l'shem Pesach pasol, to havalei psulo begufo. So that's what he holds, and therefore it's Yisaref Miyad. So the case on the top where it says that it's Yisaref Miyad, that's talking about where you take a random animal, you try to make it l'shem Pesach, it's pasol and it's a psul beguf, so it needs to be burned right away. So says the Gemara, that answer, let's see if it holds up. Be Rabbi Eliezer, that can't be, because if that's Rabbi Eliezer, chatas nami mechayev, the halesle the Rabbi Eliezer, tov b'dvar mitzvah pater. Remember the machlokas that we started with today, or the one that we referenced at the beginning of the day today, that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua argue about tov b'mitzvah. That if a person is doing an action that's wrong, you take a korban, it's really not a korban pesach. You have intent to do a korban pesach, but you're wrong. So the halacha is that Rabbi Eliezer would say that in such a case you're going to be chayev. However, that would also be true by a chatas. The chatas nami mechayev. Why would he say that a chatas would also be in the case of a chatas that's brought on Shabbos? Because in the case of a chatas that's brought on Shabbos, the less Rabbi Eliezer told the b'dvar mitzvah pater. He would never hold that it's pater because he holds that it's chayev, and that's just not how we paskin. So that can't be either. Ella, answer number 4. Tir Gemara Rav Yosef, Bered Rav Salah Chasida, Kamed Rav Papa. So Rav Yosef, the son of Rav Salah Chasida, says in front of Rav Papa Hamani, who is the author of the Mishnah on the top line that says Yisaref Miyad, that must be Yosef ben Chonoihi. We're going to conclude like this shita, even though we're going to entertain one more possibility. What does Yosef ben Chonoihi say? Titnan. Last of the short lines, Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. 10 lines from the bottom of the page. Titnan. This Mishnah is located in Maseches Zvachim. Titnan. Yosef ben Chonoi Omer Hanishchaten l'shem Pesach u'l'shem Chatas Psulim. He says that if somebody takes a random korban and they make it l'shem Pesach or for a Chatas, they're puzzle. Alma, what do we see from here? Psulo begufo hi u'mishum hachisaref miyad. That's the case at the very top line. The brisa that was difficult for Rav, that's how Yosef ben Chonoi works for Rav, because he reinterprets that brisa to say that it's speaking about a case where someone was nishchat l'shem Pesach, and the halacha is alma psula begufo mishum hachi yisarif miyad. That's why we get it, why it's being burnt. But when it comes to the world of the chatas, ubivture, when we're saying that one is pater if they do a chatas, which is a mitzvah, it's a mitzvah to bring a chatas. So then savar laka Rabbi Yoshua, who holds to bidvar mitzvah, is going to be pater. So this is an acceptable answer so far. But the Gemara wants to try one more approach, and then we'll come back to Yosef ben Chonoi's answer on the last of the short lines. But before we get to that, let's learn one more thing. Ravashi Amar. Ravashi says, Rav de Amar Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher of Yochanan ben Beroka. Really, there's a machlokes in the Tanaim. The Bryce at the top of the page is one shita that says Yisaref Miyad. But Rav, who says that lo bai akira, that you do not need to explicitly state your change in intent from asham to olam. So if that's true, then he just holds like Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, like Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher of Yochanan ben Beroka. What does he say? 3 lines into the wide lines, the Tanya, the bright writes, Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher of Yochanan ben Baruch Omer. If, let's say, there was time during the day, you as the shochet, you didn't check. You should have checked if the bailam were still invested. You didn't check if they were alive. You didn't check if they were still interested. You still did the shechita. The halacha is your chayiv. And what do we see there? Do you burn it right away? No. In contrast with that Mishnah, Rab is going to hold like Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher of Yochanan ben Baruch v'tav or tzura. So we should v'teuvar tzura. So we should wait. The animal is dead already. We should wait till it starts to look like it's a dead animal, and then v'yotzei b'beis hasreifa. Why? My taima lav mishum delo boy akira, and it's a perfect match for Rab. So now Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher of Yochanan ben Baruch matches perfectly with Rab. Nothing, no problem at all. Then Rav can hold of his shita of lo boy akira. Says the Gemara Mimai. That's not necessarily the case. Dilma, maybe the reason why that animal has to wait and not be burnt right away. Dilma mishum desavar la ketana debe Rabba baravua. Damar afilu pikol nami boy ibor tzura. There are other circumstances that generate needing to wait for the animal to look like it's dead before it's burnt. The yalif avon minosar. That we have a Gzeira Shava that teaches us that it's possible that's the reason why we're waiting, not because Rav holds a lo boy akira. Lav dafka that this answers the problem at all. Tilote machi, and we have to say this because if we didn't, the nitwu bailim ma'ikol meimar havadai boy akira. It must therefore be that we do need akira, because otherwise nitwu bailim. If the bailim became tamei ma'ikol meimar, how would this solve that problem? It doesn't solve any problems for Rav. So it has to be that this is the case. Therefore, havadai boy akira. It therefore seems that we do need to have explicit language to change from an asham to an ola. Da'amar Rav Chia bar Gamda, as we saw already today. We know that there's nafkaminas there, and that we should push it off. So says the Gemara, we have to reject Rav Ashi too. Rather, the correct answer is like the previous one that we learned of Yosef ben Chonaihi. So to review, we had the statement of Rav. Rav said, Lo boy akira. Rav says that when we change an asham to an ola, you do not need express language. You don't need it at all. You don't need to say anything. Explicit language. You don't need it at all. The brisa on the top of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis says, yes, you do, because the only way to understand that brisa is by saying that boy akira. How do we answer the question? We answer the question with the fourth attempt that we had, which was Tir Gemara of Yosef, 3 lines before the Gemara gets wide, where he said, based on a Mishnah, that we're talking about a person who had a regular animal that they were shechting for the sake of Pesach and a regular animal that they were shechting for a chatas. And that's how we explained away our Mishnah, our Bryce on the top, which says Yisareit Miyai. Hadran alach elu dvarim, Baruch Hashem, we finished another parak. We should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Let's continue.
You only say it once.
I can say it more.
I'm saying you only say it 3 times.
I do. I don't even know why I say it 3 times.
I don't know either. I assumed it was like a chazak.
I don't know. Hadran alach elu dvarim, hadran alach elu dvarim. Do I say it 3 in a row? I interrupted.
It's like Beetlejuice. You gotta always be prepared.
Let's just add lahavdil to that and continue. Says the Gemara, a new perek, Ketzad Solin. How do we do the roasting? Anyone interested? Please know that Reb Yitz Brandis has access to a lamb that we will put a spit on. We're going to discuss right now how to put that spit on and make it it doesn't apply nowadays unless the Beis HaMikdash comes by then, please God, it should. But this would be the din. So assuming that Yitz is going to get this spit, here's how it's going to work. Ketzad Solon Asa Pesach, how do we roast the Korban Pesach? So the halacha is, Ayin Dal Malaf Nu Perek Ketzad Solon Mevian Shifod Shel Rimon. You take a spit that is made out of the wood of pomegranate trees. The tochvo tochpiv ad beis nekuvto. You pierce it from within its mouth out the backside of the body. V'nosin es karaves b'nei me'av letocho. And according to the Tanakama, you leave the innards where they are. Rabbi Kiva argues with that. He says, no, if you leave the innards where they are, then that's kimin bishul. Rabbi Kiva Omer, kimin bishul huzeh. That's absolutely not correct. Because then it's like they're cooking. It's as if the insides of the animal is inside a pot. That's not roasting. You got to take it out. So therefore, what we do is ela tolen mechutzala. We hang it on the outside. Also, as well, ein solon asa pesach lo ala shapud. You should not use a regular skewer, which we assume here to be metal. Metal has the whole thing gets very, very hot. That's problematic, and the Gemara is going to discuss that soon. Below al ha'askela, and not on a frame that's made out of metal, even if the wood is it's got to be a whole wood construct here. He says what?
The grill.
Oh, like a grill. Yeah. Oh, I didn't even read. I saw that Rashi, but I didn't read that. V'kula chad taimas, we'll see in the Gemara, but yeah, I didn't read that word. Wonder if that's what it actually means. The Meforshim say it's a reshes, it's a netting, some type of netting.
The grill.
A grate. Okay, perfect. I guess it all comes back to French anyways, because that's definitely what he was talking about. Amar Rav Tzadok Maaseh Rabban Gamliel Shamar LeTavi Avdo Tzei Utzlei Lanu Es HaPesach Al HaAskala. Yet it seems to be that maybe it's not such a problem, because Rav Tzadok told a story about Rabban Gamliel, who told Tevi, one of the famous Avadim in Shas, go make a Pesach for us, go roast it, Al HaAskala, and do it on this metal structure. Okay. Says the Gemara, V'nesi shel Maseches. Why don't we use metal? We could bring it on metal. What's the problems? Answers the Gemara, Aidi decham miktsaso cham kula. The kamatve machmas hashiput. If you use metal, because some of it will get hot, then all of it will get hot, and therefore v'kamatve, it's going to start cooking machmas hashiput. It's going to start cooking from the heat of the spit itself. Rachmana amar, but the Torah said you're not allowed to do that. Tzli eish, below tzli machmas tavar acher. It has to be that it's being heated and cooked only from the fire. Now, if you take a piece of wood, even if you heat one end of a piece of wood for an hour, as long as the fire doesn't move that far, the other end of the piece of wood is not going to be that hot. It's not going to get hot. It won't be that hot at all. So therefore, we should not use metal. The nasi shel dekel. Why don't we use a palm tree? Says the Gemara. Aidi de isle shive, because it has shive. Rashi says kanalir. Let's see what he trains there. That's charitzim. There's little grooves inside the wood. Shasu shuros. The wood has a lot of grooves in it, and therefore mapik maya, it draws out the moisture from within the grooves of the wood. The havakim avushal. That is unbelievable. Do you know what a small amount of water we're talking about here? It's a violation of tzli eish. We have to make sure that the wood that we're using is very, very dry. V'nesi shel te'ena. We should use the te'ena from a fig tree, because that doesn't have a lot of grooves in the wood. Says the Gemara, Aidi de mechalchel mapik maya, because the middle of it is kind of like very soft and has a lot of moisture in it as well. So mapik maya b'havalei k'muvushal, same concern. The nesi shel alon v'shel charu v'shel shikma, these types of trees, they're much, much harder trees. So it says the Gemara, Aidi de isbe kitre, because they have knots in the wood, they're very knotty woods. They have these like little bumps on them. Mapik maya mapik maya, that water will come out. So it says the Gemara, shel rimon nami isbe kitre. What are you talking about? All trees have some knots in the wood. So even the rimon tree is going to have that. So it says the Gemara, you're taka right, but either shi'e kitre, shi'e means to smooth out. So maybe the knots were smoothed out or smoothed out. They were either naturally like that or you made them like that. V'baisema benavga barshata. It's basically a sapling of the rimon tree. It's a young tree, the lesbe kitre, that doesn't have these knots. Says the Gemara, va'ika be piske demapik lebe piske levar. But what about the ends of the trees? There's be piske, the place where you cut them, so the moisture can draw out of the sides of that. By the bark, I understand, but from where you cut, there's much more moisture. Says the Gemara, demapik lebe piske levar. You're right, but the ends of the woods are at the outside of the spit, so you don't have to worry about that. That's not going to cook the animal. And then one more mini sugya, told 2 dots, and then we'll stop. Masnisin to look Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah does not align with the Tana of Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanya. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kishem sheshavut shel eitz, eino nisra, kach shavut shel mateches, eino martiach. Wow, this is kind of going against the rules of science. We know that metal can transfer heat from one end to the other very, very quickly. Absolutely, we're all very familiar with that, even without the science behind it. So he argues and says that the metal is not problematic. Amrlo, the Chachamim said back to him, Zecham miktsaso cham kulo. What are you talking about? If a little bit of metal gets hot, the whole thing gets hot. Zecham miktsaso eino cham kulo. But with wood, so that's just not true. With wood, when one side gets hot, the other side doesn't get hot. So what the Gemara is basically, the Chachamim in this Mishnah are the Chachamim in our Mishnah. Everyone in our Mishnah, just Rabbi Yehuda seems to not agree. So we'll stop here at the 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down at Vimnosein. And Yirtzeh Hashem will pick up not tomorrow night, but we will pick up on Thursday night. Have a good couple of days. Have a beautiful night.